Hey everyone, welcome back, and today we are going to talk about forces of irrationality. This module discusses the discipline of rationality and reason. As a human, you are burdened with a number of unconscious psychological forces that prevent you from achieving success with client acquisition. These forces make you more likely to take action that directly or indirectly stops you from getting clients, and you need to be aware of them. And a warning, this video might offend you. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. So, starting with the decision sum. Understand, where you are now with your exact client acquisition state is simply the result of all the decisions you have ever made to do with client acquisition. It's the quality. If the quality of your decision making ability is good, you're more likely to succeed. If it's not, you won't. It's not rocket science. Most people don't know how to make decisions because they have never been taught how. The easiest way to improve your decision making ability is not to try and make good ones, right? So what I mean by this is you don't have to, like, you just need to try to not make the bad decisions, and basically that's how you make good decisions. There are seven forces that you have in your psyche that, if not addressed, will lead to you making poor decisions around client acquisition. If we address these, we can become more rational. So, reason and rationality. Reason is the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments logically. Rationality is the quality of being based on or in accordance with reason or logic. If you are rational and reason well, you'll be right and make the right decisions more often. A decision is right when making it leads us to take an action that helps us in achieving the goal. The first step towards rationality is awareness. That's what this video is for. How do we become rational and able to reason better? Inversion. We simply focus on how not to be rational and how not to reason poorly. If you don't make the wrong decisions, you will make the right one. So, the number one force is bias. Bias means to lean towards or have a predisposed inclination towards something or away from something. A bias is like a magnet or an attractor. If you have a bias towards something, you will attract and experience more of that thing. If you bias against something, you will repel and reduce experience of that thing. A bias is a psychological gravitational pull. Rule: you cannot develop a bias for something without developing a bias against something else. Biases are polarizing by nature. Next one is mental inertia. If a human is biased towards something, their psychology will continue to evolve in that direction. The stronger the bias becomes, the more of this something that bias attracts or repels, meaning the stronger the bias becomes. So that's like a feedback loop. Why biases are a problem? A bias polarizes you towards a certain way of doing something until the only way you can do that thing is the way the bias has set. It's not time, like when it's time to adapt or change, someone with a bias will struggle and reject the change as not me. Let's say if you're biased to think that Aditya is the best in the industry when it comes to client acquisition, you will attract more information and experiences to confirm that. Example: I once had a client who was biased towards not seeming spammy. He was biased to think that all cold emails, regardless of the quality of them, were going to be seen as spam. This led to her being irrational and making decisions that were not conducive to client acquisition. Even after I explained that she purchased from us after receiving the cold email, she still insisted on it being spam and that it gives against her way of doing things. So like, she bought the program via cold email, but she was still not ready to believe that cold emails do work. She was thinking that it's a scam or a spam, right? So I was talking to a salesperson who was biased towards the idea that if someone wants to think about it, they're never going to buy on the call. His bias stated that if someone wanted to think, they were not properly qualified and to push them would be a mistake. Because of this bias, he did not make an effort to handle objections when the situation arose. Even when I told him to try, he did not try very hard because of his bias to just reconfirmed bias. Right. So I was reviewing a piece of email copy from a client who was biased towards long form copywriting. He was biased to think that people would not respond to a short form copy and that More detail means more response. I corrected him by showing him our data from short form, but he rejected the data and started trying to reconfirm his bias, saying, "Yeah, but that's your own niche." He had no evidence to support his bias, in fact, the opposite, as his long form copy was not working, but it was so unconsciously strong that he refused to be a part with it. Another example, we took on a client who was biased towards maintaining a deluded self image of being good at sales. He blamed everything under the sun for why calls would not close, as his bias was "I'm good at sales." This one manifests heavily in people who have a lot of experience. Over time, we corrected the bias, but it took some doing. When I started building client acquisition systems, I was biased to believe it would work with enough iteration and scientific testing. Because of this, when the systems did not perform, I was biased to think that I just needed to run more tests. Biases can be a force of good or for bad. When it comes to client acquisition, if you think you're biased to think that your systems will work, you're most likely to get results than if you think they won't. But only if you caveat your positive bias with something so you don't become deluded. That's important, because right here the person was deluded and right here it was a good bias, right? So now action step, list 10 biases that you have that are negatively affecting your ability to acquire clients. The second one is emotion. Emotion is the number one enemy of client acquisition. It's the reason why most people fail. Here is the issue, you have a current situation in business in the now, and you have a goal which is your desired situation in business in the future, right? Both of your states, the now and the future, create strong emotions. Your state right now may be pain, desperation, suffering, unhappiness, fear, anxiety, panic, sadness, or hate. Your future state might be pleasure, freedom, joy, happiness, confidence, love, over the moonness. To bridge the gap between now and later, you need to solve the problem of client acquisition. So this is the diagram which explaining it. So what? Your entire emotional condition and technically life hinges on client acquisition. This means emotionally you are extremely sensitive to things that happen to or in your client acquisition systems and processes. Entrepreneurs that are trying to grow are more emotionally sensitive to client acquisition than almost anything else in their business, and it is because they find it so hard. The more emotionally sensitive you are to client acquisition, the more irrational you are going to be, and thus you are going to make more mistakes. Then there is one more lesson that we are going to add, and it is iterative Darwinian acquisition theory. And in that we talk about how scientific method is the only way to achieve success in client acquisition. This requires testing, patience, and emotional control. You can build two types of acquisition systems: successful, that is built with slow, methodological, logical method, like logical, thoughtful, and deliberate change, while the failing one would be built with erratic, impulsive, illogical, sudden, chaotic, accidental change. The only difference between 1 and 2 is that person 1 operates with rationality and not emotion, and this one operates with emotion. You must learn to control your emotions and do the following things when the hypothesis fails. Sit with and face the distressing emotions created by our now state, or resist the temptation of pleasurable emotions created by our future states. Why emotions are a problem? Because you, like, just understand this, emotions are not the problem, it's what they encourage that is the problem. Emotion originates from the word emovere in Latin, which means to move. Emotions encourage movement, in other words, action. Almost all emotions cloud your judgment and encourage us to make decisions and therefore take actions that are not right. Positive emotions are just as destructive as negative ones if not controlled. Common emotions that interfere with client acquisition, and this is not a definitive list, are anger, fear, confidence, surprise, sadness, happiness, joy, excitement, hopelessness, anxious, panicked, stressed, bitter, insulted, frustrated, delighted, bored, annoyed, envy, etc. There are two rules that you always need to follow. Never make a decision around client acquisition when an emotion is present, especially a strong one. The stronger it is, the longer you need to wait. And always make changes to your client acquisition systems based on data and not emotion. It does not matter how you feel or hope. You need to learn to watch and observe your emotions, and you can do this via meditation. 20 minutes every day just watching your breath, and trust me, I've made a lot of money just with this one thing. So here are some examples again. I was making like $10,000 a month with my agency, and I saw a competitor making like 2,000, sorry, $20,000 a month. I got envious and mad and started booking sales call to listen to their systems to try and copy them when my own systems were in KPI. And it would have got me to like 20,000 in 4 to 6 months if I just waited. And I later realized this, and they worked out, right? One of my client was panicking on a coaching call because he did not have, like, he had not received any replies from his cold email in the last 4 days. He usually received them in like 1 to 2 days. He was stressed and had blown the whole thing out of proportion and started proposing changes to the system and the offer. I told him that we need to get regression to the mean to do this thing. And during the coaching call he got 3 replies, no joke. Just on the same call he got 3 replies. This happens with us as well. On a sales call, when we are showing someone our system, we keep getting replies. So that's the thing. When starting one of the first cold emails I sent received an extremely negative response. I got angry, sad, confused, and stopped sending cold emails, changing my entire copy and taking 2 weeks to plug the courage to send it again. Never change an entire system based on the opinion of a few select. Force 3 is belief. The main bottleneck entrepreneurs face don't exist in their business. That thing exists in their mind, first as beliefs, and then they manifest it in their business. It's extremely likely that you have limiting beliefs in your head to do with client acquisition. Beliefs restrict, constraint, and limit you. Humans pretty much can do anything as long as it's within the laws of nature and physics and within the comprehension of their belief system. If you had negative experiences with client acquisition, I guarantee you have negative limiting beliefs to do with it. A belief is a perceived statement of truth about something or the way the world works. And again, an action item, list out everything you believe to be true about client acquisition. At least write 5 to 10 sentences. The next one is ego. It is the fourth force. In client acquisition, ego is the enemy. Rule: never take anything personally when it comes to client acquisition. In client acquisition, you are going to be dealing with people. Some people are not very nice and they can do weird, unexplainable things that might upset, offend, anger, or annoy you. It pays incredible dividends to never take anything personally when trying to build a business. The best way to win an argument is to avoid one. If you do not do need to argue, detach your ego and remove yourself from the conversation. Why is it a problem? We are in the business of solving people's problems and to make money. When dealing with people who want to become clients, they should be our focus, right? The second a sales conversation or email chain diverts from these focuses and it comes down to protecting or defending your ego, the opportunity is dead in the water. Because it won't, like, if you get into a quarrel, or uh, if you get into a I don't know, if you get into an argument with someone, in that case, they're never going to buy, and you're just wasting your time, energy, and focus, right? It does not matter how intolerable or offensive a prospect may seem, it's imperative you stand your frame and do not stoop at their level. Example: I was once on a sales call with a guy who was extremely rude. He said, "Why would I buy from you when you have a weird accent and you are not very persuasive?" What I should have done at the point was to end the call and walked away, but instead I got offended by his opinions and fired back with some snarky comments about something he would told me in his business. It was a big mistake. We bricked for about 5 minutes before I decided enough was enough and left the call. I took the offended energy into the next 4 calls and they all went shit. And I found out later that day that the guy emailed 4 of my clients telling me I was a disaster and should not be trusted. If you win in the argument, you lose in business. Ages ago, I sent a cold email to someone in the gym niche. I received a nasty reply. I replied with a similar nasty tone and he posted it to the Facebook page and we had some mutual friends. He cropped out his reply, making my reply seem totally out of proportion. One of my clients was tagged in a post by a disgruntled customer telling his LinkedIn audience how awful my client was. My client had drafted a whole response to put in the comments and it was a little aggressive. I told him not to comment anything. He's glad I did. YouTube comments used to offend me until I realized they are just words from useless people with nothing better to do with their lives than personally insult someone to make themselves feel good. And also, don't do things how you want to do them, do things based on the best practices. Except that if you are new to something, your way won't be right or the best way. The force 5 is resistance. Resistance is an internal sensation that prevents you from taking action on client acquisition. It's the emotion you feel or sensation you experience when you sit down to work but cannot work. Resistance is an enemy to client acquisition and operates with 7 more principles. Principle 1 is there is an enemy working against you, resistance. It's intelligent, malevolent, and nasty. Principle 2 is the enemy is relentless. It aims to kill your desired reality and quash all your hopes and dreams. Principle 3 is the enemy is produced by a fragment of you, it's inside you and it comes from you. Principle 4 is you're not the enemy, it's a force of nature produced by you, but you can't help it, just like a pulse. Principle 5 is you must duel yourself. You are the knight and the dragon. War is inevitable. The knight must win. Principle 6 is goal comes first, resistance comes second. There cannot be a shadow without an object and the sun. Principle 7 resistance can be overcome with pain, love, and assistance. The opposite of resistance. It's beatable. Resistance is a force and it takes many forms. There are 30 forms of resistance I have defined, and I guarantee plenty of them manifest in you when you sit down to do the work. Fear, it is the most common, not working because you are afraid of what happens if you do. Instant gratification, it is not working because you want or expect instant gratification. Doubt, then there is anxiety, then there is rationalization, there is learning, research, comfort, perfection, waiting, justifying, warped priority, distraction, support, feeling vulnerable, addiction, criticism, denial, drama, procrastination, self love, self loathing, identity trap, routine, entitlement, judging, burnout, opinions, uncertainty, and pain avoidance. For example, when starting Freedom Formula, I was responsible for cold messaging. Every day, resistance would manifest in one way, making me feel a negative emotion to stop me from taking action. Every time this happened, I would open my phone and send 3 more cold messages. I built a habit to meet resistance with instant action at even at 3 a.m. Eventually, resistance caved in to me. The sixth force would be experience. Most business owners let their past experience with client acquisition predict their future ones. Experience is, in my opinion, bullshit to a degree. And I don't care if someone has 20 years of experience, if their method is not up to date with the last 2 months, they won't win. What worked 20 years ago does not work now, and experience often hinders more than it helps in business. Remember, whatever experiences you have had in the past about client acquisition were probably not created out of sound practices with systems thinking and scientific method. If you sent 150 emails and got no responses, that does not mean that in your experience cold email does not work. It means you sent 150 emails and they did not get a response, and we cannot afford to draw beliefs and conclusions from isolated events with poor practice. I cannot tell you how many people have joined our program and ruined the results because they were acting on past experience. The simple truth is that if your experience was able to get your results, you would have solved the problem and would not need any help. So we can't have you relying on it to make decisions. I'm not telling you to scrap everything you have ever learned or know based on your time in business and your market. I'm just telling you not to let it close your mind to new ideas and methods that, in your experience, don't work. Some examples are I had a client who had a negative experience with courses and client acquisition coaches. She purchased and she was slightly reluctant. She then dove into 3 videos of the program and declared the whole thing bad based on my experiences of other courses. It was irrational. I once told a client that cold calling might work in his niche. He insisted that in his experience, cold calling does not work. When asked why, he could not give a tangible answer. I asked for data and metrics and the averages to demonstrate it doesn't work. And he could not even recall the scripts he used or what methods or tonality he used. He just remembered making cold call for 3 to 4 days, getting no meetings, and declaring it as ineffective. That's also irrational. We had a client who was running Facebook ads to a video sales letter. Her funnel was not converting, and upon investigation, we found that she was not using practices taught in the program. Instead, she made it up herself because in her experience, whenever she tries to model someone else's funnel, it does not work. When asked why, she explained that 3 years ago She tried to copy a ebook funnel and got no conversions. That's again irrational. And the seventh force is projection. Human beings are mirrors. What this means is that when looking at someone else, they will see part of themselves psychologically. This is called projection and is a devastating force of irrationality that screws over many people trying to acquire clients. Projection is where you take one of your qualities or beliefs and assume that other people you're dealing with share the quality or belief in question. This is a natural thing done by 99% of humans on the planet, and we assume people see the world the same way we see it. Projection becomes an issue when you begin thinking people will act or behave a certain way just because you act or believe in a certain way. Right. Projection also creates fear and it sometimes paralyzes you. This is because of the fear of judgment. Many people are worried and anxious about client acquisition because they fear that people will judge them for trying to do it. The only way to have a fear of judgment is to be actively judging other people for that thing internally in your life. For example, I am afraid to make a salesy video sales letter because I think I might come off as a snake oil salesman. That that's because I've watched so many people salesy VSLs and judged them for being a snake oil salesman. If I'm afraid to make a cold call because someone might judge me for sounding nervous, that's because other people have cold called me and I have judged them for sounding nervous. Your internal world reflects your external world just like a mirror. The fastest way to eradicate a fear of judgment is to stop judging other people for the things you are afraid of being judged for. Write out some of your judgments right now. Examples: one of my client was really struggling to close people on the first call. Upon inspection, we realized that he would never close or buy on the first call. So he assumed that other people would not. Because of this, he did not have the conviction in himself during the objection handling phase. Because if the shoe was on the other foot, no objection, rebuttal under the sun would convince him to buy. People often write copy that they would want to read instead of writing the copy the prospect would want to read. They pick words and phrases based on what makes them tick and is understandable to them. They assume that other people in the niche thinks the same way they do, and they end up dead in the water because of this. When I was starting my YouTube channel, I assumed people would not respond to flashy thumbnails and clickbaiting titles because I personally hate them. This led me to being irrational and making suboptimal decisions for my YouTube channel. The same thing happened when getting an editor. I preferred watching content without cuts and editing, but it turned out that most people don't, and that was, again, my irrationality. Some examples of the judgment mirror are: a client of mine was terrified to ask emotional sales question because he thought that the prospect would judge him for doing it. We established that we established this was because if he was asked these questions, he would personally feel uncomfortable asking because he understands the intention of the person asking, to make him emotional so that he will buy, and he judges them for doing this as he thinks it's manipulative. Because of this, he was projecting his judgment onto his prospects, and this interfered on his ability to close. I used to be afraid of asking people to subscribe, like, and comment on my YouTube videos because I used to judge people for doing it thinking it was desperate. Therefore, I did not ask people. I thought other people would think I'm being desperate. Then I realized it, stopped judging people who did it, and the fear slowly went away. So that was it for this video. If you have any questions, you can contact us at any time. We'll meet in the next one.